Hello, this is Mesos Aurum, and welcome to SFML tutorials. Today, we'll be constructing a Pellets class for our SpaceRocks game. First, we'll make our C++ file. We'll say Pellets. Then we'll make our .h file, which will also be called Pellets. In our C++ file, we will say sharp include and pellets.h. In our .h file, we will say sharp include entity.h. And we will make our class as usual. So we'll say class pellet and private and public. We'll make our constructor and our deconstructor. Sorry, that should have an S up here. We will need to store all of our pellets, so we will say standard and vector entity star pellets. We will need pi for our angle. We will say const float pi equals 3.141593 f. We will need a pellet timer to know when to fire. We will say float pellet timer and float pellet timer max. We'll need a base velocity that our pellet is going at, so we will say float base velocity and a max amount of pellets that we have on screen. So we will say unsigned int max pellets. We will need to check if our pellet is out of bounds and delete it if it is. We will say void out of bounds unsigned int index and sf vector 2f window size. When we need to fire our pellet from the ship, we will say void fire pellet, and inside we'll say float angle and sf vector 2f position, which will be the position of our ship. Later on, we will need to get all of our pellets somewhere else, so we will copy this and say and get pellets. We will need to update all of our pellets, so we will say void update and float pt and sf vector 2f window size. Finally, we will render all of our pellets. We will say void render sf render window and window. Now we will define all of these. We'll scroll up and then make this a little cleaner. In our constructor, first we will set our pellet timer. We will say pellet timer max equals 0.3f. And since we're counting down from the max to 0, we will say pellet timer equals pellet timer max. We are going to set our base velocity as 256. Base velocity equals 256.0f. And we will set the maximum amount of pellets on screen, max pellets, to 3. In the end, we will need to delete all of our pellets. So we will say for unsigned int I equals 0. I is less than pellets dot size, then plus plus I. We delete our pellets dot add I, as well as erase pellets dot erase pellets dot begin plus I. And this will erase the pellets in the vector from the beginning of the vector to your place in the for loop. Now that we're deleting things, we can say if pellets dot add index, and we will get our position dot x is less than 0.0f, or, and we will go down here and we will copy this right here. Our pellets at also x is greater than or equal to our window size dot x, or our pellets dot add index get position dot y is less than our 0.0f, or our pellets add index get position dot y is greater than or equal to our window size dot y, and we will close that off. Then we will just copy this, paste it, copy that, and put it where the eyes are. Now we can scroll down a bit. In here, all we need to do is just return our pellets. Return pellets. In fire pellet, all we are doing is making a new pellet and putting it at the tip of our ship. In an if statement, we need to make sure that our pellet timer is below 0, our pellet size is below our max pellets, and that our spacebar is being pressed. So here we will say if pellet timer is less than 0.0f, and our pellet size dot size is less than max pellets, and our SF keyboard is key pressed, SF keyboard scan space is all pressed. To turn the angle of our pellet towards the tip of our ship, we will say angle minus equals pi divided by 2.0f. We need to add a new pellet to our vector. We will say pellets dot pushback, and inside we will say new entity, which will take in sprites slash pellet dot png, as well as the size of our png, which is 16 by 16. We need to know the index of this specific pellet, so we will say unsigned int index, and that will equal pellets dot size minus 1. We will need to know the direction that the pellet is going in, so we will say SF vector 2f direction, which will equal cosine of our angle and sine of our angle. And this will just be the unit vector of our direction. Now we can set our pellet's rotation. We will say pellets dot add index dot set rotation, and inside that we will say angle. We will set our pellet's velocity. Here we will say pellets dot add index dot set velocity, and inside here we will say base velocity multiplied by our direction. We're going to copy this for ease of use, and we are going to set our origin. We'll say pellets add index dot set origin. Inside we will also say pellets add index, and we will also get our entity size, and then divide that by 2.0f. Now we will set our position at the ship's position. We'll say pellets add index dot set position at position. Finally, we will reset our pellet timer. We will say pellet timer equals pellet timer max. Ultimately, what this is doing is making a new pellet and then sending it from the center of the ship out the tip of the ship and going at its base velocity that we have specified. Now scrolling down, we're going to go in here. First, we're going to subtract our pellet timer by the delta time. We will say pellet timer minus equals delta time. Inside of a for loop, we will say for unsigned int I equals 0. I is less than our pellets dot size, then plus plus I. First, we need to update our entity. We will say pellets dot add I dot update entity. Inside of there, we will say delta time and window size. Next, we will animate our pellets. We will say pellets dot add I and animate at delta time. Finally here, we will check if we're out of bounds, but beforehand, we will say if pellets dot add I does not equal null, And this makes sure that the pellet itself exists. We will say out of bounds at I and window size. Scrolling down to render, going down here, we will just need a for loop like this, and then close it off, go in here. We will finally draw our pellets. So we will say window dot draw star pellets dot at and I. Now we will save everything and go into the SpaceRocks.h file. We will say sharp include and pellets.h. Below ship we will say pellets. In the C++ file, we'll go down to update. First we will say pellets.fire pellet, and inside of here we will say ship.get rotation, as well as ship.get position. Next we will say pellets.update with delta time and window size. Finally, over here we will say pellets.render with our window. Saving everything again. Now we can enter the debug menu. We can see that when we fire by pressing the spacebar, our pellets come out the front of our ship. Thank you for joining me today. If you did, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great day.